Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. You are here for season 4 of Wrestling at Random, where, as we've talked about throughout the season, anything and everything is in play. The randomizer is bursting at the seams with more professional wrestling content than ever. And yet, with all that professional wrestling content to choose from, the randomizer chose an episode of WCW Thunder from 1998? Really?
It does. This is how the show works. This is, we take all of the internet's wrestling content, we dump it into the randomizer, we fire it up, and it will pick anything for us to watch from any territory at any time that we plugged in there, and we will watch and review that show. The season 4 theme has been, we're busting at the seams. We've got so much stuff, and if you look at all of the things the randomizer has picked so far in season 4, they're all over the place, all weird stuff and a lot of stuff we haven't reviewed before.
It's the most eclectic season by far.
So I'd say it's a little refreshing to get a dose of WCW Thunder from 1998.
Yeah, I could see that. I guess if you twist yourself into a knot enough, you could say, I'm thrilled to watch late 1998 WCW Thunder. All kidding aside, I'm always happy when WCW comes up. That was, WCW fan first and foremost in the war between them and the WWF. Thunder certainly was an interesting time, which I know you're going to get into. We did a previous episode of Thunder, but you've got even more background on that show than we had in the past. But it's an interesting time for WCW Thunder. We're not just a couple months in. We're pretty deep now into the first year of Thunder being on television. But it's clearly not the A show.
Yeah, Dave Meltzer, the Wrestling Observer newsletter, reports that wrestling on the TBS network dates back to the launch of the Superstation in the early 80s, featuring Georgia Championship Wrestling, then Jim Crockett Promotions, and World Championship Wrestling over the years. Based on the success of WCW's Monday Nitro on TNT, Ted Turner approved additional content, a 2-hour Thursday program called Thunder. The show was almost not named Thunder, as on checking the availability of the name, ESPN owned the Thunder name for television for a motorsports show.
Yes, I was a big fan of ESPN Thursday Night Thunder back then. They had the USAC sprint cars, the dirt track racing, which was really the program that launched the careers of Jeff Gordon, Tony Stewart, a lot of the guys that go on to be the biggest stars in NASCAR during their boom period. I had not thought about the connection there between those two television programs.
Late November 1997, Dave Meltzer reports, the current plan still seems to be that starting in January of 1998, the Monday show will become NWO Nitro, perhaps built around a feud with Hogan's NWO, with he and Savage against the Wolfpack, and the members splitting up and taking sides. Some talk that Bischoff and Rick Rude would do the announcing for the show,
Woof.
Which is a job that Rude did in ECW.
Not well.
Thursday would be WCW Thunder, built around Flair, Sting, The Giant, Luger, and Bret Hart, and they'd feud amongst themselves. What would then make the pay-per-view show special is that all the big stars would be on the pay-per-view, and you'd have theoretical interpromotional battles there.
So this was the idea. The original concept was a brand split before that was a phrase. I definitely remember in my WCW fandom back then that you were starting to see around that time, 97 into 98, signs that they were thinking this direction. Things were starting to be branded, not WCW, but WCW NWO. You'd see that a lot in the magazines. You'd see that even on television. Here on this show, the microphone stands say WCW NWO.
Yeah, you would also have segments on Nitro where they'd kind of test that out, and they'd have the NWO take over the show.
Yes. Oh,
and
God,
they would,
that horrible episode of Nitro.
and it was always horrible. It was always
minutes
terrible.
dismantling the set. Talk about always horrible. Remember the first NWO sold out pay-per-view?
Yeah.
Hideous.
So, yeah, discussions changed to instead make Thunder the NWO show. But ultimately, the decision was made to keep it WCW. January 8th, 1998, the Thunder debut drew a 4.02 rating and a 5.99 share, going head-to-head with NBC's Thursday night lineup at the time, which included Friends, Seinfeld, and ER. So even though the show was almost totally forgettable, except for a great in-ring interview confrontation between Ric Flair and Bret Hart, the audience is into the hype and the pageantry of WCW wrestling. Literally, almost nobody knew until a few days ahead whether the debut show would be 2 or 3 hours.
Wow.
Effective January 26th, so just a few weeks later, Nitro moved to 3 hours. That became the 3-hour show every week. That decision was made largely because WWF ratings were shown significant growth as soon as Nitro went off the air in those few weeks. So they thought by going to 3 hours, they could hurt the WWF ratings.
It was sort of the next step, or kind of on the opposite end of the program. What the little war that we saw where Raw would start at 6:59. So then a few weeks later, Nitro would start at 6:58. Then Raw would start at 6:57. Then Nitro would start at 6:56 Central Time, obviously. I remember that with bemusement, and yeah, I guess we had that going on with the extra hour as well.
By August of 1998, so just 8 months after the debut of the show, in cost-cutting moves, Thunder was live for 2 hours, and then they would follow that by taping the next week's show. In January of 2000, Thunder was moved to Wednesdays to prevent it from going head-to-head with SmackDown, the WWE show, and by October of 2000, they were taping Thunder after Nitro. And of course, March 21st, 2001, the year WCW went out of business. After 29 years on TBS, the final wrestling show aired. This last episode of Thunder aired on March 21st, 2001. Wrestling would not be on the TBS network again until AEW Dynamite debuted January 5th of 2022.
Yes, moving over from TNT. So yes, a long time with no wrestling on TBS, which is sad in some ways. But if you're watching the death of WCW, you weren't necessarily pining for that wrestling,
No.
That specific type of wrestling to return. But still, good to see wrestling back on the Turner networks.
This show we're going to review is from October 8th, 1998. So the day before my 19th birthday. Season 1, episode 35, if you're watching on Peacock or the WWE Network. The generic music of Thunder opens the show.
It sounds, and this is not dubbed music. This was the intro music that back then, which sounded like the select screen for every video game you ever played in the 1990s.
Yes, it was free music out of the Warner catalog, the Time Warner catalog here for them to play. We're told we're live from Indianapolis, Indiana. This show drew 11,315 fans to Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, just shy of capacity. 10,496 paid for a gate of 271,495 for Thunder.
Insane. You always hear Dave Meltzer and others talk about kind of the lag in that in 1998, WCW was starting to do so many things wrong, but they still were popular, largely because of Bill Goldberg. They were drawing great houses, great gates, but you can see the cracks forming. But it's wild when you look at this show and what was on it, that it drew what it did. Obviously, none of this stuff was advertised ahead of time. Shows were just drawing.
No, just having WCW come to town was what drew that house.
That was the draw at that point. And if you weren't around back then, it's hard to describe just how hot WCW was. Even after the WWF got hot and started to take over the lead, there was a period where WCW, while it may not have been winning the ratings were every Monday night, was still very hot in its own right in terms of ticket sales, ratings, pay-per-view buys, all that sort of thing. And we're still in the latter stages of that here. You mentioned the opening episode of Thunder and the rating that it did. It didn't do much worse of a rating here in October. It did a 3.7, which is not bad. But, obviously it would be incredible by 2022 standards. even though everything has changed, or 2023 standards as we record this. But back then, that would be a good number for your B show.
We're told we're 17 days away from Halloween Havoc 98. We will talk about Halloween Havoc 98 because this show's trying to build to that. We'll mention some of the things as we go along. There's some laughing over the PA system.
Oh my God!
And Tony Schiavone doesn't know what it is, and he's very cross at the production team for allowing this laughing to continuously happen.
Tony Schiavone is ornery throughout this show, or ornery, as they would say down south, about this constant cackling. My first thought is, could this possibly be a Hugh Morris push? And then I thought, no, it can't be.
No. Do you know what it is?
Chucky?
It is Chucky. It's the build to Chucky and Rick Steiner.
Oh, God. How ridiculous is it that we talk about the more things change, the more they stay the same? Wasn't there a Chucky NXT crossover?
There was,
recently,
yes.
as we record this?
Where his son is now the top star and champion. Yeah,
what a
Rick
world.
Steiner's son is there. But yeah, no, it's super funny that it is. I'm like, is that Chucky? And I reached out to one of the Voices of Wrestling guys who does a Thunder podcast, and I'm like, hey, was that laughing? What was that? Is it what I think it is? He's like, the worst thing ever, the Chucky and Rick Steiner thing? Yes, that was Chucky coming to town. I'm like, okay, thank you for confirming the memory I had suppressed. That's exactly what it is. Horrible.
You know what's also horrible? Tony Schiavone's look on this show. I'm sorry. I love Tony Schiavone.
We love Tony.
I love Tony. But he's got this like partially unbuttoned button-up shirt. He's wearing all these chains and jewelry. And it's hilarious because at one point in the show, like he'll go out and do several in-ring interviews. And then during, I think the last one that he does, it might have been the Bret Hart interview. He's got his shirt buttoned all the way up. Like someone backstage, I don't know if Bischoff like slapped him and told him, button up your damn shirt, Tony. I don't care that it's the B show, but he buttoned that shirt up by the end.
Mike Tenay is away, unfortunately, so our broadcast team is Tony Schiavone, Bobby the Brain Heenan, and Stagger Lee Marshall.
Lee Marshall, he of late stage AWA, he of the 1-800-COLLECT road report. Here it is Mike Tenay on a road duty trying to track down Scott Hall in a bar. So we have Lee Marshall here making it very B show with Tony Schiavone and Bobby Heenan.
You know what Lee Marshall's claim to fame would be after wrestling?
I do, but tell the fine listeners.
He's the voice of Tony the Tiger from Frosted Flakes.
Amazing. What a world. A guy that did not accomplish much in the professional wrestling world probably had a better career than almost anyone in pro wrestling in terms of longevity and getting a consistent paycheck.
Scott Hall is with Mike Tenay at a bar in the Indianapolis area. He lets us know he's about like 40 minutes away from the arena is what he says, and he's acting drunk, and Drunk Hall cuts a promo on Kevin Nash. He challenges him to come meet him at the bar to fight one-on-one.
Yeah, this would be considered a less than classy angle considering the real life alcohol problems that Scott Hall battled throughout his career. I cannot focus on anything, though, other than Scott Hall's NWO Racing polo, because that flashed back to when Kyle Petty, son of Richard Petty, my childhood hero, NASCAR legend, joined the NWO via the WCW race car, changing to NWO, and Kyle Petty was the pilot of the NWO Racing, number 42, I believe it was. And here in the bar, Scott Hall is wearing an NWO Racing polo. That is the only NWO shirt that I would ever own. I never did. I would wear that, though. I would wear that. I was not an NWO guy, but they could get me with that.
Oh, I had the black and white and the red and black. I was
WCW all the way.
And then in the back, we see Nash's limo taking off to find Hall. We don't see Nash because he's not actually at this Thunder show.
No. It's also funny because did he have like a satellite feed of Thunder on in his limo because he's gone immediately after this. Like, who would have been able to tell him? Would Kevin Nash have been able to run that quickly? The only time I've seen him move that fast is when he's getting a massage and Jeff Jarrett tries to hit him with a guitar. And that wasn't for 6-7 years later.
So key takeaways. Nash is going to find Hall. Hall is 40 minutes away. And Mike Tenay is going to stay with this to the end. Those are the key takeaways I got from the first time. Kanyon comes out. And he grabs the mic. He tells everyone the answer to the question is nobody. And then he says, who's better than Kanyon? And he gets mad because the people do not properly answer with nobody.
God, I loved Kanyon.
Canyon's great.
Such a fun wrestler, such a fun character. His voice was so great when he'd cut promos. Just such a ridiculous character that could back it up with being just really good wrestler, really innovative, deceptively huge, like Billy Gunn style, deceptively huge. He's in there with Prince Iaukea, who's like cruiserweight size, but not like Rey Mysterio size. And Kanyon looks like the Giant next to him.
Former TV champion Prince Iaukea. It's all Prince early. He hits a somersault off the apron to take down Kanyon. Inside, Kanyon picks up Iaukea, crotches him on the top rope, hits a hangman's neck breaker with Iaukea off the top there for which Kanyon hits a swinging neck breaker, and he holds it, ends up in a fisherman's suplex position for a 2 count.
Yeah, it's basically Hiroshi Tanahashi's twist and shout, but from a fisherman's suplex position, holds that cradle. Again, you would see different crazy stuff like this from Kanyon in every match than you'd see guys on other shows or in other companies using it a few weeks later. Prince Iaukea, like you talked about him hitting a somersault off the apron. At one point late this match, he hits a top rope, like springboard somersault. The thing to keep in mind is every single thing we describe looks less spectacular than it sounds when he does it.
Yes.
He's such a generic, average, boring wrestler. I hated Prince Iaukea this time, even when he was a babyface, when he was a heel. Whenever you saw him, knowing how big of a roster WCW had, you always felt like, why are there not 15 other guys in this spot? Why was this guy, even in the TV title picture, as much of a non-entity as the TV title was back then, he seemed like we'll see several other jobber plus guys throughout the show. He felt like he should have been one of those guys much more than he was.
Kanyon catches Prince on his shoulders and then just kind of throws him down off his shoulders.
He hits an F5. He invents the F5. Much.
And then he hits the flatliner for the pin. Kanyon is your victor. We go to the back. Jericho's in the back. He's yelling about Goldberg. He's calling out Goldberg. He calls Goldberg a young boy and then demands he come out, knowing, of course, that Goldberg is not in the building.
Now, he invades the locker room of Goldberg that is clearly not Goldberg's locker room. It has a sheet of paper with Goldberg just written in pencil on it. He has Ralphus in tow. We are then told, while we don't have commercial breaks here, we do get the promotional consideration paid for by the following. We are told that this show is brought to us by Twix.
We get a Scott Steiner video package where he's cutting a promo on his brother Rick Steiner. He's showing off his trophies, and he says Rick will be his next trophy.
The idea of this is cool. It goes on for way too long. Scott Steiner has about 30 seconds of material, and this goes on for 90 seconds.
Yeah, and he's not quite as unhinged Scott Steiner as we like our Scott Steiner to be.
He's figuring out how to be Big Papa Pump. This is pretty quickly after the heel turn. He's cut his hair. He's blonde. He's feuding with his brother. He's aligned with Bagwell, but he's not quite, like you said, that unhinged, crazy Scott Steiner.
Buff Bagwell and Scott Steiner come out to the NWO theme song. We've talked about that at length. Go back to our previous, our most recent review of a Monday Nitro here in Season 4, where we discussed the NWO theme song in a little more detail. Buff says that Scott is not physically ready, so the match will not happen.
He does not say that. I need to correct you. Buff Bagwell says, and I'm sure if Bischoff was actually paying attention, he was fuming backstage, because Buff Bagwell says 3 separate times in this promo, Halloween Havoc is not happening. He's clearly trying to imply or tell us that the Scott Steiner match at Halloween Havoc isn't happening. But on this show where they are hard selling the pay-per-view for 2 hours, I don't know that I would be thrilled if one of my wrestlers went out there and said Halloween Havoc isn't occurring.
Which is pretty funny because the main event didn't occur for a lot of pay-per-view watchers of Halloween Havoc 98.
A bit of unintentional foreshadowing from one Buff Bagwell here. A soothsayer, Mr. Bagwell was.
We will get to that. We'll get to a little more detail about what happened at Halloween Havoc later in this recap. If it was going to happen, Rick would be too scared of Scott, and Scott tells Buff to keep a leash on your mother. Keep her out of their business.
Yeah, apparently on the previous week's Nitro, or on the Nitro that week, Judy Bagwell, I'm assuming this was before she was on a pole.
Correct.
Judy Bagwell was getting up in the face of Scott Steiner and her baby boy.
Buff says, whoa, leave my mom out of this. Scott says, touch me again and I'll slap you like I should have slapped your mother. Buff says, you're on your own then, and he leaves Scott in the ring.
Yes. Scott says, you need us more than we need you. Buff says he's the stuff. He doesn't need them. We then see Peyton Manning, who had just been drafted by the Indianapolis Colts. And clearly he wasn't a big star yet because he's not front row. Peyton Manning is like 40 rows back. And it's so great because they show him. And then, like, nobody knows who he is in the crowd. And then he's behind, like, a wall of signs in the crowd. Like, he can't see anything, even if he wanted to see this wrestling show.
We see the New York Stock Exchange, where wrestlers are there celebrating the launch of the Capital One WCW credit cards.
I wanted one of these so bad. I wanted a Sting credit card. I wanted a Bret Hart credit card. The real story here, though, is that
I had the NWO red and black credit card.
You did. You had the Wolfpack credit card. The real story here, though, is that it's the Hardy Boys entrance music that is playing behind this this video. As that was stock music and still
famous stock music. Yeah,
maybe the most famous rights-free music in professional wrestling history. And here, it's just so funny because I'm expecting to see Jeff Hardy vibing his way down the aisle with some glow sticks, and instead it's Dr. Harvey Schiller glad-handing with some stock market types while Hulk Hogan lurks in the background.
Back to the ring, we have Meng, the former Haku, versus Larry Flynn.
Jerry Flynn. Come on. Larry Flynn's Lightning Foot Jerry Flynn, a staple of WCWB shows back then. A man whose blood apparently did not run cold enough to get a cool martial arts gimmick, but he was a kickboxer, and he was taken on Ming. He was basically WCW's answer to version of Steve Blackman, but he didn't get the push.
Meng with a drop toe hold takes him down. Big shots on the mat. Flynn tries to beat up Ming with punches, chops, kicks. No impact. Flynn hits a shoulder block off the middle rope. Not even a 1 count. Meng then just catches a kick, puts on the tongue and death grip, gets the quick squash win. I want more Meng squashes in my life. I love everything Meng, Haku, everything. This guy is one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, there's never anything wrong with him just beating dudes, putting them away quick, making short work of them. That's exactly what happens here. We go backstage to Jericho and Ralphus once again. Jericho is wearing a shirt that says Jericho 2, Goldberg 0, and he says that he's Goldberg's daddy and he will beat him later.
The gentleman, Chris Adams, comes down to the ring, but Meng still hasn't left. Meng's still hanging out. So Adams doesn't want to get in the ring because Meng is still hanging around there. So Meng looks like he's leaving. So Adams starts to get into the ring, and then Meng just turns around and kills him, tongue and death grip, until Wrath comes out to break this up.
Wrath, the former Adam Bomb, the future Brian Clark. It's easy to forget that Wrath at this point in WCW was really over. They were doing an undefeated streak with him. It felt Like they were building to a major money match with Goldberg and Wrath. And while he wasn't great, the crowd was super into him. And the idea of seeing undefeated Wrath against Killer Ming, I was here for. However, their brawl on the floor left a little to be desired.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about Wrath, like while he was very over here, he would get back over again as part of Chronic.
Yes.
With Bryan Adams. That team was super popular. We watched some shows. We reviewed one of their tag team matches. We're like, my God, Chronic is so popular.
Well, and you could do a whole nother podcast on this. Like Chronic is another one of those examples of how badly WCW fans wanted WCW to be good. Because that team had no right to be as over as they were. But WCW fans wanted something to be excited about, wanted something to be good. And so they just decided that, okay, we're going to act like these guys are the Road Warriors. And that's what they did.
So Meng and Wrath are brawling outside like you talked about. They're going to wrestle at Halloween Havoc. And Wrath goes to hit Meng with a chair shot. And he's waiting for Meng to get into position. And time stands still,
time
and
stops.
then he just hits him with this weak chair shot to the back. It was awful. Everything about this was bad.
It was like he didn't have the heart to hit Ming in the head with the chair. Ming wanted to be hit in the head with the chair. In Wrath's mind, he was going to be hitting Ming in the back with the chair. And so these two men kind of figured this out as time stopped. And eventually, as you said, Wrath hit Ming somehow in the back, but with like an overhead chair shot that went over
awful.
Ming's head and into between his shoulder blades. This was not good. And for what they were going for here, this chaotic brawl, it immediately put a pin in the balloon.
After commercial, the Horsemen arrived. It's this incarnation of the Horsemen are Ric Flair, Steve Mongo McMichael, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Arn Anderson. Security will not let them in. There's loud "We Want Flair" chants. And what's funny is between the live show and the taping of next week's Thunder, to keep people started leaving before the next show started. And so to keep them there, they told everyone, Ric Flair will be here. Please stay. He's going to come out.
It's also great because, so like you mentioned, it's the police that are keeping the Horsemen out. They say there's a restraining order against all of them except for Dean Malenko. Dean Malenko is allowed to be there. Doug Dillinger is sort of reasoning with Rick, saying, this wasn't my doing. And then we have WCW commissioner and former Horseman manager J.J. Dillon here to try to figure out what the heck is going on. Seeing J.J. Dillon out there with Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, but not managing them, instead storyline running the company, is such a trip.
Yeah, Dillon's going to try to figure all this out. The Horsemen leave, honoring the restraining orders. This is all because Bischoff is having these restraining orders because Reed Flair came out on Nitro and took Bischoff down amateur wrestling style on Nitro.
This was to get revenge and storyline for the very real issues between Ric Flair and Eric Bischoff when Flair no-showed an episode of Thunder to go to Reed's wrestling tournament. Bischoff said he was in breach of contract, and there's that whole long stalemate that eventually led to the storyline that you're talking about with Flair and Bischoff and the Horsemen here.
In the ring, it's El Dandy taking on Tokyo Magnum.
What a match. I was legit excited as I saw this. El Dandy, he of the Bret Hart promo that is legendary, talking about El Dandy backstage with Gene Okerlund against Tokyo Magnum, who it's easy to forget that we had many of Ultimo Dragon's first class of Toryumon trainees on excursion, if you want to call it that, in WCW at this time. Shima was one of them. Dragon Kid made some appearances. And Tokyo Magnum here wrestling El Dandy on an episode of Thunder. Wow.
Tokyo moving quick with awesome aggression. This guy's great.
He was great. If you have not seen, if you weren't buying Toryumon tapes in the late 90s, pre-Dragon Gate, and seeing those Crazy Max multi-man tag matches and seeing Tokyo Magnum or Magnum Tokyo in the mix. Awesome wrestler, and you saw it here. This was high-speed, fast-paced action between the two of them, particularly Magnum.
Yeah, for the brief moment that we got it, it was great. We hear the weird laughing over the PA again, and then Scott Norton hits the ring. They talk about him being the IWGP champion. He kills both of them with power bombs, and we see he's actually got the IWGP title with him.
Yes, he had just won the IWGP heavyweight title, and for some reason, he showed up to Thunder to kill El Dandy and Tokyo Magnum. So that was that. This was a fun little match while it lasted, but it did not last. It only went 2 minutes and 38 seconds. I was sad because as we were going to commercial, they said we'd be back in 60 seconds after a WCW Motorsports feature, and we did not get that. I wanted to find out who was driving the WCW/NWO car in late 1998. Instead, we're back from that break, and Eddie Guerrero, along with other members of the LWO, the Latino World Order, are here to recruit El Dandy into the fold.
Yeah, Eddie wants El Dandy to join the LWO. Tokyo Magnum's like, I want in. And Eddie's like, you're not Mexican. Get out of here.
Yes. And so I fully expect him to get beat down, but instead he just leaves all sad and dejected.
No, he's like, fair. Okay. And
sad,
so
but
I thought there was
understandable.
very funny stuff there. And Dandy accepts the offer, puts on the LWO t-shirt.
It's always sad that the LWO never led to really anything.
Scott Putski, speaking of not leading to anything, he comes out to take on Perry Saturn.
Scott Putski dressed like a jacked up vampire. What is this look for Scott Putski, and why is he here?
Putski got offense. Nobody cared.
He got way too much offense in this match against Saturn, who was super over at this point, just having left Raven's flock. Saturn was awesome, and he should have made the shortest of work of Scott Putski, but that's not how this played out.
No, he hits some suplexes, hits a splash off the top rope for not a 3 count.
More
Putski offense.
Bobby Heenan sounds legit offended that Scott Putski kicked out of his top rope splash.
Bobby Heenan is me right now as I was watching that. I
always got the impression during this era of WCW that Bobby Heenan really liked Saturn. Like, his interest level would wane in and out of these shows, particularly Thunder. He was always super, super hyped for Goldberg and does not get enough credit for playing a key role in getting Bill Goldberg over. But there were certain guys here or there that Heenan would perk up for, and Saturn was always one of those guys.
Saturn mercifully wins with the Death Valley Driver.
There's a great line here from Tony Schiavone. When I say great, I mean not great, where he says that Scott Putski needs, quote, just a few more years, unquote, and he'll really be good and he'll get some wins. This is 1998. Scott Putski debuted in 1986. He is 12 years in.
And he's a second-generation wrestler. This is not new.
Second-generation wrestler, 12 years in. I think this is the best he was going to be.
The Disciple.
Oh, God.
Representing the One Warrior Nation. The OWN. Get it?
God.
Get it? The opposite of the NWO? Huh? He comes out to cut a promo, alone in the ring. For those who don't know the Disciple, he's the former Brutus the Barber Beefcake, the former Butcher, the former Man with No Name, the former Zodiac.
The current Disciple, here he had been up to this point, shockingly, the right-hand man of Hollywood Hogan in NWO Hollywood, but here he's reborn as a biker with a big grizzly beard. He's
alone in the ring, just a spotlight and a microphone. And
just
he's
what you want on a Thursday night on Turner Broadcasting Systems. You want Ed Leslie cutting a promo.
He says, I made a good name for myself without Hogan's help.
Oh, my God.
Where and when did that happen?
I was screaming. He's saying, he made his name for himself without Hulk Hogan. This is false.
False.
He gets no reaction. And then he starts talking about, quote, Hulk Hogan's freakazoid nephew, Horace Boulder. And I shudder because what they're telling me is that we are building to a Horace Boulder and the Disciple match over, I guess, which one of them got their spot through nepotism less. I don't understand, but all I can think of is, as much as I'm not hoping this is a Halloween Havoc match, I'm like, well, this must be for Halloween Havoc.
Yeah, Horace Boulder doesn't belong in the same ring with a guy like him. Hogan got his nephew the job. He calls out Horace. I'm thinking to myself as I'm watching time go by and this segment, who okayed this promo segment? How did this get on a sheet and someone said, yeah, that's what we want to do? That horrible.
Well, it's
and then,
terrible. The idea of it is terrible. Like the idea of giving the Disciple in October 1998 a microphone on a live TV show where ostensibly you want people to keep the channel on. But the promo itself, it's every heel lying about how tough they are when everyone knows they're cowardly or don't deserve their spot promo, but it's for a baby face. What?
And then the horrible continues as Horace comes down. We have Horace versus the Disciple in the match now.
Not on the pay-per-view. We are forced to watch this right now. Horace Boulder and the former Dizzy Ed Boulder, Ed Leslie, the Disciple, in the ring right now having a professional wrestling match. Good Lord.
Disciple is wrestling with a chain wallet. This should not be allowed. The Disciple wins with the crappiest stunner you've ever seen called the Apocalypse.
He has him in like the snap mirror position and jumps and falls on his ass. However, he does not snap the neck over his shoulder. Instead, it's like over the crook of the inside of the elbow where it would not hurt at all. And nothing
Horrible.
Screams like I'm Hulk Hogan's buddy more than I get to do Steve Austin's finisher when I'm in WCW. And nothing looks more small time for your company than having the former Brutus Beefcake using Steve Austin's finisher. This was awful. And then, because this wasn't enough, Horace attacks the Disciple on the floor because this feud must continue.
We then get a video package for Hulk Hogan versus the Warrior, who this would be the big main event of Halloween Havoc 98, the rematch, not since WrestleMania 6 has Hogan versus Warrior happened. So this is 7 years in the making, a big deal. I'm watching this video package, and all I can think of is how much better the WWF was and just so much more superior at this time when it came to video packages.
Oh, yes.
It's unbelievable how not good any of these video packages are.
There's never been a larger gap between the top two promotions in wrestling in any era, in any country, in any region than there was between the WWF and WCW in terms of video production, video packages, vignettes at this time. It's shocking. Like WCW should not have even tried to put video packages together at this point because they came off so low rent. And also them trying to do supernatural angles or gimmicks, like the whole thing with Warrior appearing in Hogan's mirror and then Hogan breaking the mirror. My God. Like
nobody else could see it, but we could see it and Hogan could see it. Oh, it was awful.
One of the first times we had the like hidden camera stuff in WCW, it didn't work at all. Like my recollection was that Warrior showed up on Nitro the first week he was on. Like it got a great reaction. It popped a rating. People were hyped, even if they shouldn't have been, really, in retrospect. But it died a death so quickly with that backstage mirror gimmick and everything that happened afterwards leading into the paper.
Oh, and he would appear and vanish through the trap door that ended up like breaking Davey Boy Smith's back.
Yeah, that ended up being really functionally the end of Davey Boy Smith's career as a wrestler that can move at all, was him taking a bump on that trap door.
Shivani's in the ring. He's joined by the television champion Chris Jericho with Ralphus. He says, you're not Goldberg, you're green, so come out, Greenberg. He tells Shivani to announce Goldberg, and he does. We hear Goldberg's music. Referee Nick Patrick rings a bell and starts counting, and he raises the hand of Jericho, saying that he was of course, we're told repeatedly that Goldberg is not in the building today.
Jericho celebrates wildly. Jericho is so entertaining during this time.
Tremendous.
In the early days of him being a heel, just so creative, so funny, so entertaining in a different way than anyone else would be on the show. It's also in modern times wild to listen to Goldberg appear on Chris Jericho's podcast and hear them as like good friends now. And they're, water under the bridge after everything that happened between the two of them around this time, with Goldberg not wanting to work with Jericho, and later a backstage fight between the two. They're good buds now. And you wouldn't have expected that back then.
Last Monday on Nitro, we see Sting and Bret Hart fighting in the back.
This was awesome. I vividly remember this brawl. It was great. It got me hyped for the idea of Sting versus Bret. I'm amused that we only get the stills here, which Tony Giovanni tells us are photographs, which they're clearly not photographs. This is not a pay-per-view that took place the night before, and you show the stills to get people to order the replay. This was the same television program 1 week prior on the same network of the same family of networks. Why can we not just show this video to get people?
Why do we not see the video? Makes absolutely no sense. We see the Scorpion Deathlock on Bret by Sting. We're told both men were taken out via ambulance. Shivani's still in the ring. He then is joined by Bret the Hitman Hart, the U.S. champion.
Bret comes out to no music and no fanfare, which is very odd.
Yeah, cuts a promo. Pretty straightforward, nothing exciting.
I thought this was a great promo from Bret by WCW standards. He's annoyed, he's angry, heel Bret Hart, just annoyed with the world. He calls Tony Schiavone stupid. He calls Sting stupid. He said he isn't waiting for a challenge from Sting. He's challenging him. He says he will destroy everything Sting stands for because you suck. And then he says he hopes Sting's mascara doesn't run. I love annoyed Bret Hart.
No, his delivery was great. They're building to a match that won't deliver as well.
Which is such a shame, because it is a legitimate dream match and was for so many years the idea of Sting with the Scorpion Deathlock against Bret Hart with the sharpshooter. But like most things in this era of WCW, it wouldn't live up to your imagination.
We get a 4 Horsemen video package.
This was awesome. This made the 4 Horsemen look like badasses, which WCW never actually did during this time period. It even included clips of Arn Anderson from the 80s beating people up. This was awesome.
Yeah, what it had was just music. What it needed was overdubbed promos. Yeah. It needed quotes. Instead, it was just
cutting cool promos.
Yes. Instead, it was just music to them looking like badasses. Could have been a lot more effective if they were also bringing a message with it.
By WCW video package standards and WCW treatment of the Horsemen in late 1998 standards, I'll take it.
Dean Malenko of said 4 Horsemen comes out. He sits down in a chair in the ring. He says, "You forgot one horseman. He didn't get a restraining order, so he wants to wrestle." Bischoff saunters out, and Jimmy Hart and the Barbarian are sent out. Bischoff tells him he'll give him $1 million to go out and destroy Dean Malenko.
I love this. Barbarian comes out, and Bischoff's like, "Well, I'm paying you, what, $500,000?" And Barbarian's like, "Yeah." Bischoff's like, "I'll double it right now if you take Dean Malenko out." And as ridiculous as that dollar amount sounds, I have no problem believing that in this era of WCW, Eric Bischoff was paying the Barbarian $500,000. Totally tracks. They were paying Lanny Poffo $150,000 a year, and he never once appeared on their television, and they paid him that for 3 years.
Barbarian versus Dean Malenko, and it's all Barbarian early, as Bischoff on commentary says this was not an oversight, it was a total setup. Bischoff tells us that Benoit and Malenko haven't gotten a push because they don't draw money.
Oh my God.
Ugh, this is what we hate in our wrestling, is
Not
when
only
you're trying
is
to
it-
tell us about pushes and how it's fake while I'm watching it, trying not to think of it being fake.
Yeah, it's the worst. It's the absolute worst. It would be like during the crescendo of a big action movie, someone jumps out of a flaming helicopter, and then the movie stops, and then like the director says, just in case you were getting invested in this, remember, this is fake. It's a stuntman. Nothing that you're watching is real. It's a movie. That's what this is like. It's awful. It's also one of those things where it's like, yeah, Eric Bischoff, if you want an example of why all those guys left, like what, a year and a half later, it's garbage like this. Even in the storyline, this didn't serve anything or anyone.
No, Barbarian accidentally boots Jimmy Hart off the apron. Malenko gets him down and puts on the Texas Cloverleaf, and the Barbarian taps out.
I didn't expect that quick Barbarian tap out to the Texas Cloverleaf here. At least someone was interested in putting over Dean Malenko. Bischoff did at least have a great freak out at the announce desk after this happened, including smacking Tony Schiavone in the head repeatedly with a big stack of papers during this meltdown. I love that.
Raven has a microphone. He's sitting in the corner in the ring.
Yes, Raven. I am so excited. We have not had enough Raven on this podcast 2 weeks in a row.
2 weeks in a row, that's right.
Listening in linear fashion, we had an awesome Raven match with Justin Credible, which you didn't see much of in 2000 ECW Raven. Jeremy laid out exactly why that happened that way. Go back and listen to that episode if you haven't. And here we have 1998 Raven, who I was a big fan of in WCW, and he's cutting a promo in the corner. I'm excited.
Yeah, he fought his way out of the gutter. He started out with DDP, Diamond Dallas Page, and look where he is. Look where I am. What about me? What about Raven?
The best line in here, he says, DDP gets to wrestle with Jay Leno, Dennis Rodman, Karl Malone. Who do I get? The Flock.
The Flock.
But the reason this is great, he says, who do I get? The Flock. And then he goes, wow. Like that subtle, complete burial of everyone that has had his back for the past year just broke me. I love that so much. I love Raven. This is awesome. He basically says that everything DDP has is what Raven, deserves. And DDP comes out, and we're getting an impromptu rematch from their awesome match at Spring Stampede earlier that year for the U.S. title. It's DDP versus Raven, two actual stars here on Thunder. I'm hyped.
Oh, this show needed this.
Ooh.
I was dragging at this point. I was so happy to get this match.
No show that we've watched has ever needed something like this more than this show needed it right now.
Raven's choking him with his flannel shirt, which is the most 90s thing he could do. DDP quickly fights back, goes for the diamond cutter. Raven hits a low blow. He gets his short knee lifts in, which is one of my favorite Raven moves.
Nasty short knee lifts. These guys are over, by the way, at a level that no one else on the show has been. The other thing I noted right away is, oh my God, Raven is jacked. Like
he is.
His neck is huge. He's got giant biceps. Like he's wearing the Raven getup, including the shirt. But this is the best shape I've ever seen this guy in.
Raven does his Russian leg sweep into the guardrail. Back in the ring, drop toe hold by Raven, and DDP goes face first into a chair.
Just before this, Tony Schiavone has a baffling line. Raven tried to crotch DDP into the post, tried to pull him crotch first into the post. Page pulls Raven face first into the post instead, and DDP said, basically, Tony said, well, that's the overpowering leg strength we've always known Diamond Dallas Page to have. What?
We have not. No. Raven picks up the chair. Page pushes it into Raven's face. Hits a belly-to-belly suplex for a 2 count. Raven catches him with a drop toe hold face first into the buckle this time. A 2 count for Raven.
It's an awesome clothesline right before that. These guys are wrestling at a frantic pace.
Yeah, they're gonna get their stuff in here. This was great.
Awesome. This is like TV match on this just dreadful show. This is one of the best TV matches I've seen on this season of this podcast, where we've reviewed a lot of TV shows. These guys are going, not only are they going a million miles an hour, but it's with great intensity. Like, this is awesome.
Oh, and the crowd wanted good wrestling action. They were so ready to be into something because they've gotten crap the entire time.
Well, think of, what we've had on this show so far. There's not been a match that's been truly competitive. The opponents that have lost have been Prince Iaukea, Jerry Flynn, Chris Adams, if you can call that a match. We had the Tokyo Magnum El Dandy no contest, Scott Putski, Horace, and the Barbarian. Those are the guys who lost going into this. So they were desperate for 2 stars having a battle.
A sleeper by Raven. DDP's out of it. Raven tries to go for a backslide, but DDP counters by spinning him around. Hits the diamond cutter out of nowhere for the pin. Tremendous fun.
Oh my God. This was awesome. And it's 2 weeks in a row on this podcast
of good Raven.
That Raven has knocked it out of the park, validating my love/obsession with Raven as a character and a wrestler from 1995 to about 2000. Man, this was great, and we needed this.
We get more indoor pyro as we go to the main event, okay? So that, not the main event. I can't wait to see how you follow Raven and DDP with this main event.
On Thunder. What could possibly on Thunder main event over this great DDP Raven match? It's got to be something big, because we had indoor pyro, and then we have Michael Buffer.
Michael Buffer on Thunder for a main event. I was blown away. I was not expecting to see this. He says, there are 2 men that hate each other's guts. I'm like, all right, okay, here we go.
You're speaking my language. All I want out of professional wrestling is 2 men who hate each other's guts. What could possibly be better? We're told it's going to be a member of NWO Hollywood against a member of the NWO Wolfpack. And there's a myriad of big time, high profile matches of guys that I know in
Scott Norton's here. I know he's here. He's the IWGP champion. I don't know what's going on.
Many guys that hate each other's guts here between these 2 groups. Who could it be?
Who could it be? The NWO Hollywood's Stevie Ray comes out with Vincent.
Nothing says Thunder more than a main event of Stevie Ray with his horrible, weird singlet gear with the second grader cookie cut out NWO logos all over it, with Vincent, the former Virgil, as his second. They should have come out to that wacky NWO B team music instead of the actual NWO music.
This has to be the only Buffer entrance in history of Stevie Ray's career, right? Stevie Ray could have never been introduced by Michael Buffer any other time than this, right?
I can't fathom. I can't think of any big Harlem Heat tag title match that would have had Buffer do it. Yeah, definitely the only solo Stevie Ray Michael Buffer introduction. And he introduces him as the master of the slapjack.
His opponent, the NWO Wolfpack's Lex Luger, who is, as Buffer tells us, known for his torture rack of doom.
I always love the ad-libbing, the extra added flourish of adjectives that Michael Buffer would bring to his WCW ring announcements. And we had the torture rack of doom here. Tell you what else is of doom. Lex Luger's goatee. Yikes.
Oh, hideous.
Lex Luger with this goatee coming out to the hip-hop influenced beat of the NWO Wolfpack music does not work.
So this match is a lot of posing and flexing. Stevie does hit a super kick at one point.
I was shocked.
In the ring, though, Luger counters a pedigree into a backdrop, hits a few clotheslines, the Luger bionic forearm, and he goes to put Stevie into the torture rack
of doom.
But Scott Hall runs in. So Scott Hall got Kevin Nash away from the arena. in this 2-hour live show, he lured him 40 minutes away. Now, Scott Hall left. He was not there. So Nash could have turned around and come back to the arena. Did not. He would have made it back within the 2 hours.
Let's recap the timeline. The first thing that happened on the show after the open was the Scott Hall, Mike Tenay interview in that bar 40 minutes outside of Indianapolis. So that would put at 7:45 Central Time, Scott Hall would have left. He would have left. Well, he would have even left before then because Nash would have been on the way. So let's say at 7:30, Scott Hall would have left. Nash would have had from 7:40 to 9 o'clock to get back to the arena when he realized Scott Hall wasn't there, and yet he did not make it.
Where is Mike Tenay? What happened? Mike Tenay was going to follow this story to the end. He was on assignment here. He was not part of the broadcast to be part of this assignment. Nobody explained why Tenay never came back if Hall could make it back. And we were forced to endure 2 hours of Lee Marshall. Like, what is going on?
In this match was talking about the speed of Stevie Ray.
I don't know what's happening here. So
I think I am making up my own storyline because that's often what you had to do to get through these WCW shows. I'm assuming there was some sort of lucha mask stand on the side of the road between this far Indianapolis suburb and Market Square Arena, and he just got distracted.
So Luger gets hit with the slapjack. Conan tries to run into the aid of Luger, but he gets jumped coming to the ring. Hall hits a razor's edge on Conan, and he says, "Hey, yo, it's survey time. Are you here to see the original black and white, which gets a lot of boos? Or did you come to see the Wolfpack? A lot more cheers?" He says, "One more for the good guys," as the show goes off the air.
Yeah, the story here was that Hall was faking being drunk at the bar, so Nash would come and try to get him. He would leave before, and then he would come back and do this attack. But there's a whole hour intervening here. If this was a 1 hour show,
yes,
would have been
makes
perfect.
a ton of sense. No problems whatsoever. Easy.
You do that Mike Tenay interview at the top of the second hour, 10 minutes into the second hour, and you're fine. This was such an unforced error just from carelessness.
Yes, just completely unforced error is exactly what it was. This show, like you mentioned, did a 3.6 rating, but it also did a 1.2 rating on the replay because they would air it twice for the West Coast as well.
Amazing.
So huge numbers. Halloween Havoc. This show was 17 days before Halloween Havoc. Almost half the pay-per-view audience didn't get to see Diamond Dallas Page versus Goldberg, the main event for the heavyweight title.
I was one of those people. I was livid.
Likewise, so was I.
I was so mad. I was so excited for DDP and Goldberg. They had done a great job getting you excited for this match, and it ended up being an incredible match, which they replayed the next night on Nitro as a make good. But man, talk about unforced errors.
Yeah, so they ended up going long on the pay-per-view, and the pay-per-view providers just cut it off right in the middle. So
well, supposedly, I actually had just been listening to a compilation of Wrestling Observer radio mailbag segments, and someone asked Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez about this, and what Dave said actually happened was that it was the plan for that pay-per-view to go long. They informed the pay-per-view providers, but some of them just were so on autopilot about how long the pay-per-views were going to be that they set the cutoff time for the top of the hour, the end of that third hour still, and it ended. So it was a rare time where it was not actually a WCW mistake, but it looked like it was a WCW mistake. And to give you an idea of how crazy the wrestling wars were at this time, WWF was convinced that WCW did this on purpose to then have an excuse to show DDP versus Goldberg on Nitro the next night in full to pop a rating because it
was a huge rating. It was a big success for
They
them to
won.
show that match.
They
Yeah.
won the ratings that Monday night, and WWF was like, well, they had to have done it on purpose. That's how crazy the ratings wars made everyone, that WWF thought WCW would intentionally piss off hundreds of thousands of people who ordered the pay-per-view just to pop a rating on Monday night. What a time.
The Rick Steiner Scott Steiner match that was being built to turned into Rick Steiner and Buff Bagwell against Scott Steiner and the Giant for the tag team championship.
Well, that sounds about right, given where the tag titles were at this point. There are no tag matches on this show. The tag titles aren't mentioned. This is during the time period where Eric Bischoff was legitimately considering doing away with the WCW tag team titles altogether.
J.J. Dillon at that show okayed that match, but said should Scott and the Giant lose, then Rick would get his singles match with Scott on the Halloween Havoc card. So they ended up having that match that ended up just going like 5 minutes. Rick Steiner would then dump Buff Bagwell as his partner for Kenny Chaos, who became his tag team championship partner.
I have no recollection of this. One half of High Voltage with
Yes.
Robbie Rage, who had actually gone on to be a semi-regular in New Japan for a period of time. That's an actual thing that happened, though? Rick Steiner and Kenny Chaos for the tag champs?
He dumps Buff to pick Kenny Chaos to be his partner as tag team champions, and then he dumps Kenny Chaos in a way that eventually leads to Judy Bagwell holding one of the WCW tag team titles.
I do remember that. Wow.
So WCW, everybody.
Yeah, it just pains me so much because there's so much I love about WCW, but I cannot deny these things are every bit as much, if not more, the true WCW.
So Sting and Bret Hart. So we had that whole Sting and Bret Hart build. They had a 15-minute match that Dave Meltzer gave 1.5 stars to.
Oh my God. Wow. I have no recollection of that whatsoever, and I guess that's why. Because I did order the pay-per-view and see that match.
Yep. And then the Hogan Warrior match, Dave Meltzer gave -5 stars to.
I remember the match, and I remember that rating from Dave, and it was definitely warranted. It's
tremendous stuff. So
it's also funny when you look at this episode of Thunder and then the show they taped later that night. Can you imagine sitting through that 2 hours of wrestling that we just watched, where the only thing with any redeeming value was that awesome Raven DDP sprint? After that, this is the card for the match, or for the show that took place immediately afterwards. Van Hammer defeats Sick Boy. Conan defeats La Parka. Fit Finlay defeats Riggs. Kidman successfully defends a cruiserweight title against Kaz Hayashi in a 9-minute, 23-second match. I'm sure that was awesome. Chavo Guerrero defeats Prince Iaukea, and your main event, after 4 hours of professional wrestling, it's the second time in the same evening, if you're in the Market Square Arena, that Stevie Ray main events in a singles match. So he probably had another Michael Buffer introduction as the master of the slapjack. Stevie Ray loses by disqualification against Dean Malenko in 5 minutes and 9 seconds.
Man, what a time to get excited to go to Thunder. Coming to your town.
The next time WCW went back to Indianapolis, they did not draw 11,000 people.
No, there's no way. So, whew, I'm going to ask you, I know what your best thing on the show is. It has to be Raven, right?
I'm honestly still buzzing.
What about Raven?
Match. I watched that earlier today, and it was just like a lightning bolt of electricity. It's two of my favorite wrestlers from that time period, just at the height of their powers, going out and having a great match when there was no reason to. No one would have cared. There's not a soul backstage that would have cared if they just went out and had a boring 5-minute match, clearly, given everything else they booked on this show. But they had enough pride to go out there and just kill it.
Yeah, it is by far, by leaps and bounds, the best thing on this show. Worst thing for you?
Oh, there's no question. Disciple cutting a promo.
Yes.
And wrestling Horace Boulder. Horrendous. Offensive to every wrestling sensibility that I have.
This is terrible. The Scott Hall timeline of events broke my brain.
Very
as
WCW.
I'm like, this is terrible as well. I think there's a couple honorable mentions to.
There's an honorable mention to Scott Putty getting so much offense.
That was it.
Saturn.
Yes, that was it right there. Way too much Scott Putty offense as well, and just and not having. You have Ric Flair available, and he's nowhere to be on this show or the next show.
Even though they told people he was going to be there to try to get him to stick
around. He came in to be seen for the live crowd, but definitely was not part of the television. So yeah, absolutely, so much horrible to choose from, and this show would get worse. Like Thunder,
worse. This is still like the first few months were like the WCW is trying with Thunder era. They're not trying, but you still have some stars, and you might every other week get a good cruiserweight match or something like DDP and Raven. It would be like sub WCW Saturday Night by the end.
At the end of towards the end of season 2 of this podcast, you can go back and listen to a 2001 or 2000 episode of Thunder that we reviewed. So that is in your archives right now. So you can go and listen to that. Everything in the free feed is evergreen content. So you go back and listen to the show. You don't have to be upset that you missed when we covered a late stage Thunder back in season 2. Too bad I missed that. That would have been awesome if I was a listener at that time. No, go back now. It's evergreen content. It's waiting patiently for you. You can go listen to it right now and take a trip down memory lane with that. In addition to all of the podcasts we have in the free feed, we also have a Patreon. That's the best way to support this show. Patreon.com/wrestling@random. There we have over 100 bonus episodes. So if you sign up at patreon.com/wrestling@random for the lowest tier, the basic tier will unlock over 100 episodes in our back catalog. If you're an Apple Podcast subscriber, if you press the subscribe button right now, it will unlock those extra bonus episodes right in your Apple Podcast feed that you're listening to this show on right now. So there's plenty of ways to get additional bonus content, and that's where we put the weird stuff, the stuff that doesn't quite fit here, not full shows. We put all that over at the bonus content, so give that a listen as well.
We should give a plug for, as people are listening to this, if you're listening in linear fashion, the most recent episode on the bonus feed is something that I think all longtime listeners and new listeners, but particularly longtime listeners of this podcast will appreciate. If you've been listening for a long time, you knew that in the first few seasons, especially, we could not get away from Greg the Hammer Valentine.
Ugh.
This bothered Jeremy in particular at a cellular level.
Oh,
so we've been waiting /worried /excited if you're me, to see if anyone on the Intentionalizer tier on the Patreon would request a Greg Valentine match or a series of Greg Valentine matches. Well, that has finally happened. The latest episode in the bonus feed is a curated list of, dare I say, the best of Greg the Hammer Valentine.
It is by far the best because
it's better than anything we saw on the free feed so far from the Hammer. That's for sure.
And it's still the best Greg the Hammer Valentine. I'll leave you to the bonus feed to hear my opinions on the best of Greg the Hammer Valentine. All right. If you can't support the show financially in these times, we understand that as well. Another way to support the show is to tell your wrestling fan friends about the show. Wrestling fans know other wrestling fans, so please tell them about the show. Help them subscribe to the podcast. Show them how to subscribe, where to subscribe, all of the bonus content, everything. Show them all that stuff, and follow us on our social medias. That's at WrestleAtRandom, Twitter and Instagram, Facebook.com/WrestlingAtRandom as well. And of course, we've got the YouTube channel. You can always interact with the show not only through social media, but the YouTube channel comments as well. even if you're an audio-only listener, throw us a subscribe over at the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Wrestling at Random Podcast. There, we have the video version of this podcast where the season 4 has the video versions of this podcast up there. Throw us a subscribe. It helps us work the algorithm so that other YouTube folks can discover the show as well. So please, even if you're an audio-only subscriber, go over to YouTube, hit the subscribe button there. It helps us out a ton, and it's another great way to support the show. And with that, we are going to wrap it up. We're going to call it a podcast. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Diamond Dallas Page and Raven, for rescuing. I don't think that's too bold of a word to use, for rescuing this 2-hour TV show. At least we had that little lightning bolt of excitement. Man, Thunder, not that exciting.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.